Get ready to twist your britches, kiddies, because I'm about to hate on a children's cartoon for the next 15 minutes. I have so many things I need to get done this week. I have regular life things. I need to get some videos pre-recorded for when I'm out of town at Beach City Con this year. And yet here I am, late at night, filming a review of the OKKO crossover Nexus episode. This has been so heavily advertised relative to how often Cartoon Network shows are actually advertised. The network has been holding it up and touting it as this big, huge thing, this epic crossover event between four of their most popular shows. Raven from Teen Titans Go crossing over with the newest version of Ben 10, OKKO's very own KO, and Garnet from Steven Universe. This had the potential to be really, really cool, and it wasn't. There was nothing cool about this at all. Like, I'm exaggerating very slightly because there were a couple things in this that, in principle, I think could have been really, really great, but they were all squandered so badly, and I'm going to try to be as not infuriating as I can when explaining exactly how and why I feel the way that I do about this. First, we need to talk about why you do crossovers in the first place. Looking at Ben 10 as an example, the old Ben 10, the pre-reboot Ben 10, had crossovers within its own universe. Promised possible future versions of Ben would occasionally cross over with the present Ben, or past versions of Ben would cross over with the present Ben, or some combination of those things. And in that, depending on the exact scenario, they would give us glimpses into the possible future abilities of this character and expand the lore and build up the universe, and they even used it a couple of times as an excuse to give Ben new abilities. But every single example of one of these crossovers in some way involved characters working together to do things that they couldn't have done on their own. That's the first kind of crossover you can do. That's an in-series crossover. It's a what-if style crossover, but this isn't really that. This is crossover version number 2. A crossover between two or more different properties owned by the same network, which could conceivably exist in the same broad multiverse. The reason for a crossover like this is obviously to make money and cross-promote your shows. But I would argue that this didn't even do that right. The point of a crossover like this, from a marketing standpoint, is to show enough of each of the characters involved in the crossover doing something cool that people who are fans of those shows will want to come to see their favorite characters do cool things, and then they will see the characters from the other shows doing their brand of cool things too, and they'll go over to those shows and watch those shows as well. And this episode sucked at that. The villain of this episode, a guy named Strike, who is very obviously a very poorly realized human stand-in for someone who cancels shows or censors shows to make them worse. It was kind of a jumbled metaphor. I'm honestly not entirely sure what they were trying to say with it in the first place. Has found this town, which used to be populated with great cartoon heroes. Like, they don't actually use the word cartoon in the episode, but they're great cartoon heroes, all of them owned by Cartoon Network at first, and at least as far as I could tell, they were all ones whose shows aren't on anymore, or who at the very least were not otherwise involved in this crossover event. And all of these characters lived here in this town and coexisted with each other, even though the characters who cross over for the actual bulk of this episode all came from different dimensions that weren't otherwise connected to each other. I don't really get the logic of this, but whatever, let's move on past it. This guy shows up at this town, and he defeats all the heroes there, striking them out by putting red X's over them, because that's his power. He can put red X's over people. And this turns them into statues for some reason. And it was kind of neat, because we did get to see the protagonists of a bunch of Cartoon Network shows that aren't on the air anymore. Symbiotic Titan was even referenced here, and that's a show that I thought Cartoon Network had completely forgotten about. We got to see Chowder from Chowder, a show that I really liked. We got to see some characters from Over the Garden Wall. That was kind of cool, but it begs the question, why were they all here? Why are they being called heroes when most of them are the protagonists of their shows, but aren't heroes within their shows? They're not the kinds of heroes that these characters are, that Ben and KO and Garnet and Raven are. And why, now that this guy has defeated all of these people and turned them into statues and gotten bored with it, apparently, is he calling entire groups of heroes from various other dimensions in to fight him all at once when he could be going one by one? This is one of those situations where the villain orchestrated his own demise by pulling all of these people into the dimension where he resides, all at once and giving them the chance to team up against him. And he doesn't even have anything interesting going for him. He doesn't even have an interesting motivation for doing this. He just thinks it's fun. Like, they even try to lampshade it at one point by having Raven say that she just thinks he's pure evil. Whatever, it doesn't matter. His powers aren't explained. We don't know why Xing people out turns them into statues, and his other ability, the ability to steal people's powers, is extremely inconsistent and makes absolutely no sense at all. Like, he uses this giant floating laser pen thing to zap people and take away their powers, and he somehow manages to zap Raven in such a way to take away most of her magical abilities, except she can still fly, even though the source of her ability to fly is the same source of all of her other powers. He zaps Ben's Omnitrix and makes it disappear while Ben is in his forearms form, and not only does that keep him from transforming anymore, but it also traps him as forearm instead of turning him back into Ben, even though forearm comes from the Omnitrix. Most baffling of all, though, is he zaps Garnet's glasses, and this somehow strips her of the ability to use her future vision as well as to create the glasses again. Even though she's still holding her form, she's still creating the clothes that she's wearing, so why can't she just create more glasses? She obviously still has her ability to project solid light holograms. And since when is her future vision tied to the glasses? It doesn't make any sense at all. But aside from not making sense, it ensured that these characters were without some of their most interesting powers for most of this story, and so we didn't even get to see them do anything cool with their powers. And then at the end, when KO finds a way to reverse the guy's ability to steal powers and give them their powers back, we still don't get to see anything cool because they don't do anything. Garnet punches some stuff. Whoop-de-doo. She'd already done that several times throughout the rest of the episode. It wasn't anything special at this point. KO did practically nothing. Raven did practically nothing, despite the fact that she is objectively the most powerful one here. Ben ends up defeating the guy single-handedly, but rather than, like, him using his original 10 aliens, like the original 10 aliens from the original Ben 10 or something, as a throwback to that, as well as a reference to the new rebooted show, or some cool thing like that, some cool fan servicey thing like that, he instead transforms into the protagonists of a bunch of different Cartoon Network shows that aren't on the air anymore in sequence, and then finally punches the guy once in the form of Finn the Human from Adventure Time. It was really lame, really badly done fan service. It was incredibly anticlimactic, and it's not as if it wasn't going to be, because they didn't set up any neat abilities of this guys for these characters to overcome in the first place. The only neat power that they had to overcome was his magic pen doohickey, but KO turned that to their side before the fight against the guy even really started. There were 2 action set pieces, 2 of them, in this entire episode that actually had any sort of back and forth between the heroes and some sort of villain. Like, he attacked some of them at the beginning, but they didn't really trade blows with him, so I'm not really counting it. There were 2. I've already talked about the second one where they actually fight against the bad guy and how anticlimactic it is, but I hated the other one even more, and I'm going to explain that in a second, because there's another reason why you do a crossover like this, aside from the cross-promotion angle. And that's to give your creative staff, your writers and your animators, a chance to show off neat ways in which these characters can interact with each other. Let's look at a much better Cartoon Network cross-promotional crossover episode. Ben 10 / Generator Rex Heroes United. This was a crossover between Ben 10, the Alien Force era original Ben 10, and a character named Rex from the show Generator Rex, which I thought was a good show, but it never really took off in the way that Ben 10 did, unfortunately. In that show, not only was the episode set in the home universe of one of the 2 characters who were crossing over, so that the out-of-place character, the fish-out-of-water character, could interact with the other heroes' supporting cast, and we got some cool interactions out of that. But the episode was also given enough time to unfold naturally. First of all, it was 48 minutes long, the length of 2 regular episodes of either one of these shows, whereas this episode was only 11 minutes long. 11 minutes long to cross over 4 shows. This gave the writers more than enough time to make the story feel organic, to make the exposition feel organic, and to actually allow these characters to get to know each other a little bit and play off of each other in the department of their personalities. So that by the end, when they went to fight the final villain, it made sense that they knew each other. They could work together a little bit. And they even found probably the neatest way to combine their two abilities. Ben has the ability to turn into various different aliens. Rex has the ability to produce technology from his body using nanotechnology, kind of like the newest version of Iron Man from Infinity War. One of Ben's alien is a character called Upgrade, who has the ability to merge with and then enhance technology. So Ben literally fused with Rex and made him stronger. It was so cool. It was a fantastic climax to this episode, which had real stakes to it. It involved characters who you actually cared about, even if you didn't watch the show that they came from, because they'd been established as characters within the scope of the crossover. And while it didn't really make any more sense in-universe than this crossover did, at least they had time to try to exposit away why this was happening and how in a believable way, in a way that suspended disbelief. Crossover Nexus didn't do any of that. It was too short for any of the exposition to come off as natural. Instead, it just felt like one exposition dump after another, and that ended up being the only interactions we ever got between these characters, because there was literally no other time for them to ever say anything else to each other. They all felt like paper-thin cutouts, and while I can kind of understand them skimping out on KO's personality here, because this is an episode of his show, so you're going to have to assume that it's his fans who are watching this first and foremost, the others needed some kind of character development. For people who are only here to watch an episode of OKKO and maybe haven't seen these other shows before, the other characters needed some sort of establishment other than the random character bio screens that were thrown up at their introductions. They felt like pale copies of the characters that they were supposed to be, and some of these characters are already pale copies of better versions of these characters anyway. Ben and Raven in particular. There was no substance to these people at all whatsoever. It didn't feel like they forged any sort of real bond, despite the episode trying to convince you that they did, with a big tearful goodbye scene at the end between KO and Garnet that made me laugh. It was so bad, it was so cringy that it made me laugh. And the only example in the entire episode of the characters combining their powers in any sort of neat way was when they were flying over a pit full of glowing red piranhas created by the villain. Raven having to carry them because, like I mentioned before, she inexplicably still has her ability to fly. But, oh no, the magic red piranhas can get to them and they can't just fly higher for some reason, so they have to punch them. KO and Garnet have to punch the piranhas, and then how interesting, Garnet has to punch them one more time super hard, and Ben does literally nothing, even though he's literally in Guy Who Punches Things form. This was bad. I get that they were trying to put together some fan service-y, reference-heavy thing that homaged a bunch of past Cartoon Network stuff, while also giving us a crossover between these characters, but this was awful. It is the worst thing I've seen on Cartoon Network in the last decade. It may even be the worst 11 minutes of animation I've ever seen from Cartoon Network. At all. Ever. Devoid of substance, devoid of laughs, devoid of any interesting action at all. It was a complete failure, and while I can see what they were going for, and I do appreciate the attempt, very, very barely, you cannot tell me that any member of the creative staff working on this episode looked at the final product and said, yep, that's the best version of this thing that I could possibly make. I can only imagine that the badness of this had to come from some pretty severe studio interference. Because even the worst Cartoon Network, even the worst inane drivel that we get from New Ben 10 or Powerpuff Girls reboot or Teen Titans Go is better than this. Like, the animation wasn't even really any good. I'm trying really hard not to be more harsh than I need to be, but I feel like it needs to be said. I hated this. And looking at this compared to something like Heroes United, you can really see just how far Cartoon Network has slipped in just a few years' time. If you guys want to see a really good example of Cartoon Network doing one of these styles of crossovers, go find Heroes United on Amazon or just free online. I think it's on Daily Video or something. I'm actually going to go try to find a free copy of it to download right now so I can show you guys some clips of it in this video. But please, don't support this. Don't let Cartoon Network get away with this, feeling that this was the right thing for them to do, that this was an acceptable thing for them to do. Homaging their characters in this way, in such a poorly conceived way, is insulting to those characters. And they need to understand that. They need to understand that if they want to do something like this again in the future, they have to actually put some work into it. I know I'm probably going to get some hate for being so passionate about this in this video, but that's fine. As per usual, I'd like to know, what do you guys think of Crossover Nexus if you have seen it? Let's get a discussion, as horrible as I anticipate the discussion to be, going in the comment section down below or over my Discord, link in the description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.